The job is quite varied. One of the things the Mayor does is sponsor a thing called Ride London, which is like a festival of cycling. It's going to be the first sporting event in the Olympic Park since the Olympics and the Paralympics. There's a kind of free cycle, which is a bit like the Sky Cycle and Mass Cycle. There's a classic race for all the top guys, Bradley Wiggins and so on, if he's in reasonable health anyway. And then in the middle there's something called the Ride London 100, which is a kind of route for a ride for enthusiastic amateurs, a race of 100 miles, as you might guess from the title, around the Olympic road course, or most of it, and the highest hills in southern England. And not content with sponsoring and developing Ride London, Boris Johnson has also announced his intention to compete in the 100-mile race, promising journalists that he would be a, quote, chiseled whippet by the end of it, by the end of his extensive training programme. Anyway, so actually some hours of my time have been spent trying to get him to start this extensive training programme, or to settle for the relay option, you know, where you do like 25 miles each at Tim 4. But he's going for the 100 miles. So we've got a policy decision now to come on that. And he lives around the corner, actually, as you may know, literally around the corner, almost within sight of the building. So every so often you might spot a rather wheezy figure sort of puffing along. He's done a couple of. Yeah, he's in. Yeah, the trouble is he's got this really crap Marin hybrid, which I keep trying to say will not last the distance. He's going to be swept up with the police. You've only got 9 hours to do this thing in. He's a competitive guy. He's going to make it, but he might well be last. He might be at 20,000. Anyway, but you know, and part of my job has been to try and sort of go out on training rides with a great man. So we got one at the weekend. But of course, the main part of my job is to help deliver the Mayor's cycling vision, and we unveiled that about 3 months ago, bit under 3 months ago, quite successfully, almost too successful actually in some ways. I mean, I hope we haven't created expectations beyond what's actually in the document, but more about that later. The cycling vision is not just for cyclists, it's the key thing about it. It is, of course, you know, in the sense of people that cycle now. It is, of course, for cycling, for cyclists, it is for them. It will greatly improve your travelling lives, I hope, but it's also for two other groups of people. It's for people who want to cycle now but feel unable to. We want, in the Mayor's words, to de-liquefy cycling, want to make it normal, something that you do in your ordinary clothes, not something you have to kind of gird up for and, you know, get a helmet on and get a sort of high vis on. And the third group of people the vision is for everyone, because the fundamental belief behind the document is that helping cycling will not just help cyclists, it will make life better for everyone. More cycling means lower traffic, it means less pollution, it means less crowding on the tube. The way we're selling it to Tory councillors in outer London is it means fewer cars in front of yours at the lights, less competition for parking. It makes nicer places, it just means greener streets, streets that are easier for your kids to cross the road, somewhere to sit, more places to sit and eat a sandwich. That is how we sell it to the 98% of the population of London that does not cycle regularly. And we've had a certain amount of success in that. As Peter Hendy, in fact, the Transport Commissioner, says in his foreword to the document, transport is not just how you get around, it's part of what shapes a place for good and for ill, and cycling shapes places in ways that are almost always good. Something else that Peter says is cycling has become a new test, almost a new cutting edge for transport planners. It's not just London, across the Western world, from Paris to New York, Dublin, Edinburgh. Cycling, provision for cycling is becoming a sign of a forward-thinking city. And they're doing that because they're recognising that heavy metal transport cannot, on its own, fulfil the transport needs of cities like London, where the population is forecast to grow to about 9 million by the end of the next decade. Even with all the investment we are putting into the heavy metal transport network, Crossrail and the rest of it, there's still going to be some parts of it under significant pressure. And cycling is an incredibly cheap way of providing more transport. It delivers a great deal of transport bang for the buck. These are the kind of arguments I'm having to make. We're going to put in, as you know, a kind of Crossrail bike route I'll talk about in a minute. Part of it's going to go on the Victoria Embankment. The whole route will cost in the tens of millions of pounds for the whole 15-mile route. And the bit on the embankment, for instance, will carry 1,000 cyclists an hour, segregated track in each direction, And that is the equivalent of 4 entire train loads based on seating capacity on the tube lines that go underneath the same street. Now, you couldn't get out of bed on the tube for several tens of millions of pounds. You certainly couldn't create 4 extra train loads on the District and Circle line for less than probably billions, if not several hundred million pounds. Another example of the kind of thing that the heavy metal transport people are doing is Victoria. As you know, the underground station of Victoria is so overcrowded at the moment in the morning rush hour that has to be closed regularly. To deal with that problem, TfL is spending £700 million on extending the station. The 7 buildings have had to be demolished. It's going to last 7 years, a lot of sevens in the story, and to get 15,000 extra people through the station in the morning rush hour. Now, it would be a hell of a lot cheaper, to be honest, just to demolish one of those buildings and provide a gigantic cycle park that's got 15,000 bike spaces in it, and then decent cycle routes from Victoria to the places people want to go, which are usually only about 1 or 2 stops on the Victoria line, so they're imminently cyclable. And that is what we're in fact going to do at another terminal station, save ourselves lots of money on expanding the underground station at another terminal station, yet to be announced, but whose name begins with W. And we're going to do a bike, what we're calling a bike mega hub at Waterloo, that's going to save us a huge amount of money on expanding the underground station, which is getting to be seriously overcrowded there because people are going to go on their bikes instead of one of those big Dutch-style bike carriages. I don't know if you've seen those if you go somewhere like Leiden or Haarlem or somewhere, some Dutch town. They have these huge big underground garages, just space thousands and thousands of bikes. That's what we are hopefully going to have at Waterloo. And in inner and central London, at least, I think we are moving towards a kind of post-car city. The car ownership in every single borough, regardless of social status or politics, is falling off a cliff. Give you an example, in Kensington and Chelsea, richest borough in the country, richest place in Europe actually, the level of car ownership in 2001, only 49% of households had a car in Kensington and Chelsea in 2001. 2011 census has gone down to 44%, and that is households, not people. Obviously there's more than one person in each household, so the number of people who own a car and who regularly use it will be even lower. And of course, even if you own a car, you use it less and less as well. So we're talking, even in most of inner London at least, probably talking about a third to a quarter of people regularly using cars, and even then their frequency of use is declining. So in reallocating space from motor vehicles to bicycles, we're simply reflecting what's actually happening in central London. A massive fall in car traffic and a massive rise in bike traffic. Traffic on the Victorian Embankment, for instance, part of our Crossrail route, gone down by 31% in the last 10 years. Traffic on Upper Thames Street, which is going to be another part of it, down by 40%. Traffic on the Westway flyover, which we're going to take over a bit of, down by 22% in the last 10 years. Bike traffic across London Bridge up by 190% over the same period. We're just about to release, or in the next 2 weeks, we're going to release results of a bike census, which will show quite how big cycling already is in central and inner London, and help persuade some of the people who still need to be persuaded. And I have to say, it's been much easier than I expected. We have very little pushback to our vision, even from some people you might expect to be hostile, and who are absolutely not, and who have been quite good. I just came from a meeting with one, that's why I'm late. This talks about delivery, I suppose. So what are we delivering? We are, of course, the main thrust of what I want to do is to move away from soft measures, training and so on. I mean, we'll still do them, but there'll be a lesser proportion of the whole to hard measures. Infrastructure. The thing that gets people on bikes is decent places to cycle, routes. And we have, as I mentioned, improved superhighways, the flagship of which is going to be this Crossrail for the bike, the longest substantially segregated urban cycle routes in Europe, we think, and so far nobody on Twitter has managed to contradict me. I'm always up for that, but nobody's yet found the longer one. It's going to run from somewhere in West London, not quite sure how far, might be as far out as Hillingdon, somewhere on the A40 anyway, down the surface section of the A40, which, as you may know, was in fact Britain's first cycle track. In the 1930s they built it, and it's fallen into somewhat serious decay since then. We hope to restore it to something of its former glory. It's going to be a bit of a job actually. I was in Uxbridge yesterday seeing Hillingdon Council. I thought I'll cycle back along the A40. What a great way to spend a sunny evening in London. It's in terrible condition, but we hope we can do something with it. It's our road, so we've got a bit more leeway than in a lot of other places. Then it goes over the Westway, as I mentioned, and the ultimate symbol, if you like, of the way that the city was torn up by the car in the 1960s and 70s, and now going to become a symbol of the way we are reclaiming it for the bike and for people. We can take a lane out of that. As I say, we can do that quite easily because traffic on that's fallen by more than a fifth. And then we're going to take it through Bayswater, through Hyde Park, hopefully around front of Buckingham Palace, along Birdcage Walk, through Parliament Square, along the embankment, up Thames Street, Lower Thames Street, across the Tower, and join up with CS3 to make a route all the way from somewhere in West London to Barking and Canary Wharf. So a pretty long route, at least 15 miles, potentially 25 miles. Longest substantially segregated urban cycle route in Europe. That's the flagship of the Superhighway programme, but there will be others like it, doing a north-south superhighway as well, much of which will be segregated. We're doing other superhighways which won't be. As you know, some of them can't be because they run on kind of Victorian high streets where there are masses of buses, they're very narrow. But what we're going to do there is semi-segregation, where we better separate the bikes from the rest of the traffic by, we have a lot more mandatory cycle lanes, 2 metre minimum, a lot more 24-hour bus lanes, and we will separate those mandatory cycle lanes and bus lanes from the rest of the traffic with rumble strips or traffic wands or cat's eyes or something like that. Some of those armadillo type things, Camden is doing the Royal College Street, we might do that as well. And we will reroute some superhighways as well. We're going to some superhighways just go on roads which are simply impossible to make to do anything adequately on, and so we're going to reroute them onto other roads where it's easier. So that will all be announced in the next few months probably. You'll see a couple of projects coming up. We're just about to start work on CS2, the extension of CS2, Cycle Superhighway 2, along Stratford High Street. That's a fully segregated route. We've got room to do full segregation there. Even though there are buses, because it's a very wide road. Obviously, most of the time on bus routes, the problem is that the cycle lane has to go between the bus and the pavement, and anyone stepping off a bus gets hit by a bike. And we can get around that either by putting on roads where there's no bus routes, like the A40, the Westway, Victoria Embankment, Upper and Lower Thames Street, or by putting floating bus stops in, like we're doing on Stratford High Street, where there's room. And where there isn't room, I say we'll do semi-segregation. We're going to do a lot more on junctions. The old junction review was a classic example of trying to do too much with too little money. £19 million for 100 junctions. We're now cutting that number down to 25, or thereabouts, slightly more than 25. It's turning out to be about 30, and we're going to spend 100 million instead. So we're spending a lot more money, more than 5 times more, but we're doing a fifth the number of junctions. So each junction should get massively more money and should get enough to do something properly. And that's my watchword. We'll do things at least adequately, and I do stress adequacy rather than perfection, but we'll do things at least adequately or not at all. There's so much at the moment of cycling infrastructure that's not really adequate. So that's the superhighways and junctions. The other main component of the routes is what we're calling quiet ways. These are essentially the London Cycle Network, the old London Cycle Network done properly, which are, so unlike the LCN, it will be direct. They'll be continuously signposted. You won't be able to lose your way. They'll probably waymarked. They'll be delivered end to end, not piecemeal, and they won't give up at the difficult places. So if you hit a gyratory or something that you can't avoid, you can get most places in London, as you know, on a bike, on side streets. A lot of the time it's just knowing where to go. I'm going to go all the way back to my house in Greenwich tonight on side streets, and it's just as direct actually, and just as quick if you know the way as on the main roads, and it's just as quick as I can stop for lights and things. So we're going to do a lot of that, but most of the time you will on some route, on most routes, hit some kind of junction. Like most routes, for instance, going to South East London, are going to have to go across Vauxhall Bridge or Vauxhall Joe Ager or something like that. So one of the things we're doing as part of CS5 is doing a lot better at Vauxhall Joe Ager, and we will unveil those plans in the next few months. Equally, some of the existing LCN routes aren't direct enough to be direct. You might have to go onto the main road for a bit. If you do that, we will provide segregation on that bit of main road. So that's the quiet ways. There'll be both radial and orbital. And we'll make them line up with people's kind of mental maps of London. The idea is to, as you know, the main map of London that most people carry in their heads is the tube map. So we will run them in rough parallel with tube lines. So you have a Jubilee line quite way. You can have a Victoria line quite way from around here, which will get you down into central London, down to Brixton. That's where the Victoria line goes, of course. And you'll know, you get on it here, you know the next place it'll take you will be King's Cross, the next place after that will be Euston, the next place after that will be Warren Street, Oxford Circus, Green Park, Victoria, etc., etc. And there'll be quiet way routes like that in parallel to several, though not all of the major tube lines, and several bus routes as well, and some major roads. We're going to do a South Circular quiet way, for instance, through South London, which will roughly track the A205. In the middle, right in the heart of central London, joining it all up, which is sort of the meeting I had today, just now was about, is a central London grid, and that's a combination of superhighways and quiet ways. Superhighways being the east-west crossrail route. As you know, the problem with the superhighways, one of the many problems with superhighways at the moment, they stop at the edge of the central area. They're not going to, but they're going to carry on through several of them, and then there will also be quiet ways in central London to join all the others up together, because one of the key problems, of course, is that the routes don't join up at the moment. They will do. You ought to be able to get from most places on a reasonable cycle route by the time we're finished. Not going to be perfect. This is not Amsterdam. Obviously, it took Amsterdam quite a few years to become Amsterdam, even, it's all going to take a while. Local government is a tanker. Takes a long time to turn. It is turning, but you will see, for instance, sometimes you'll see some fairly crap schemes coming out of the process. Because they're schemes that are basically being approved years ago. I mean, I've had a lot of criticism of King's Cross, for instance, not being good enough for cycling, and it was good enough at the time. It was adequate under the standards it was planned under, which are like the standards of 5 or 6 years ago, and there wasn't the focus on cycling there is now. And that's just the timeline. But what we're going to try and do is retrofit some of the schemes. We already had some success, I hope, with the Olympic Park. The Olympic Park wasn't very good, and it's going to be quite a lot better now because we're going to do some amendments to that. So that's those are the routes. I think everyone pretty much liked the plan. Even the AA and the RSC liked it. How do we implement it? The key problem, of course, is I think one of your mentions is we don't own 95% of the roads. Nearly all the quiet ways, the vast majority of the central London grid, and some of the superhighways now are actually going to be on borough roads, and a lot of my job is persuading councils to allow cycling improvements on their roads. We have to work in genuine partnership with councils. That is why we're not yet announcing any routes, apart from a few, on our own roads, until we've agreed them with councils. And as I say, they are being incredibly receptive so far, even boroughs which have in the past been criticised by cyclists. There won't be a one-size-fits-all approach. Some boroughs are happier with segregation than others. Hackney, for instance, very successful cycling borough, the highest modal share of cycling in London. 19% I think of people cycle to work in Hackney. They have hardly any segregation, you'll notice, and they're taking out most of what they have. They prefer permeability, which is obviously the humble traffic bollard, which is making streets join up better for pedestrians and cyclists than they do for motorists. So the totem of a good cycle route shouldn't always be segregation. We support it, but it isn't always necessary or appropriate. Sometimes it might just be sort of labelling and waymarking the good routes we already have and joining out the bits where they go wrong. I want to do a lot more trialling. One of the problems with the TfL approach in the past has been that they have tended to plan everything very heavily and model it on paper and then model it in actual models as well, papier-mâché models, and then build it kind of in very expensive, irrevocable stone and brick, and I don't know if you've seen the Blackfriars scheme. It's got granite, and it's got rather nice looking metal, and it's got a little piece of, there's a little lawn in the middle of the road actually. And the problem is, if it doesn't work, like the Blackfriars one didn't work for cyclists, it's very difficult. It's very expensive and time consuming to do. If it doesn't work, it's very, very expensive and time consuming to change. And I'm hoping to, we are going to do a lot more temporary stuff. They've taken confidence from the experience of the Olympic route network, build a lot more junctions in kind of orange plastic to start off with, and that's how we deal potentially with some of the opposition, because we're going to have opposition. There's There's of course, there's been general agreement in principle, but of course I can envisage it getting more difficult when I get down to brass tacks and say, right, you've got to lose this parking space, I've got to, got to reduce the capacity of a roundabout by 20% or something if I want to put a Dutch roundabout like the one we're trying in Berkshire in. And the way I'm going to do that is going to say, well, let's build you a Dutch roundabout in orange plastic, and if it does, as you claim, back the traffic up to East Croydon, then we'll take it out again. But of course it probably won't, because people will adjust. We will insist on minimum standards as a condition of our funding. We'll be laying out those minima in a new and improved version of the London Cycle Design Standards, which is going to be published this summer. I do sometimes think the main equipment that builders of cycle routes need is a lot of white paint and about 50 signs saying cyclists dismount. The whole country is littered with bad cycle schemes, but doing something badly will not be an option with our money. The choice will be doing it adequately or not at all. And if you can't do it adequately, that's fine. I'd much rather you didn't do it at all. As I say, I am careful to use the word adequate. We'll see a couple of big projects this year. I mentioned the extension to CS2, Cycle Superhighway 2 and Cycle Superhighway 5. We're going to do that in stages. We're going to do the eastern stage from Oval to New Cross first, and then we're going to semi-segregate to stage 2, and then we're going to do the central stage. We're going to change the central stage quite substantially, so we're going to do that a bit later. It's taking a bit longer to do. I think I want to relate to one other thing. Part of the reason why we are so keen to do more for cycling in London is that 2012 looks like being the year when the kind of previously stellar growth in London cycling slowed right down. We were seeing 15% in our best year, 2010, 15.4% growth on the Transport for London road network year on year. Driven by the Boris bike, some of it of course, but that's the historic trend. The average over the last 10 years has been 7.8% a year. This year it's looking like, I don't know, the figures are still being collated, but it's looking like more like 1 or 2% now in 2012, and that's very largely of course because of the weather. It's the rainiest spring for 100 years last year, and the coldest and longest winter as well, so it wasn't good cycling weather. But I think part of it also might have been because of the kind of endless emphasis on safety that there was. Now, I kind of, half of me sort of applauds the emphasis on safety. Half of me thinks it's created a political space for me to do, and for the mayor to do what we want to do. Half of me worries it's put a lot of people off cycling. So we must never stop talking about safety. We just have to be careful how we talk about it. I mean, I heard Simon Hughes MP actually use the word carnage to describe the death toll in 2011. Now that, 16 people killed on the roads in London, 16 cyclists killed on the roads in London in 2011, out of 182 million cycling journeys. That's roughly 1 in 11.5 million. In my other job in 2011, I spent quite a lot of time in Libya. I know what carnage looks like, and I promise 16 deaths out of 182 million is not carnage. So we still need to talk about safety. Cycling in London is not as safe as it should be, it's not as safe as it could be, it's not as safe as I hope under our measures it will be, but it is still relatively safe, and I'm just a bit worried that we're scaring people off in talking about it. So that in a nutshell is our cycling vision. I hope you like it, and you will see stuff happening. There's a little bit of stuff happening already, and you'll see more and more stuff happening from pretty much next year onwards, and I'm very happy to take your questions at the end. So thank you very much.